All right. Marianne Kennedy, I'm so excited to talk to you. Um,
Too.
I met you years ago when I had just moved to the area and I did a course on, you know, r- r- recognizing signs of past loved ones.
Is that
And
right?
yeah, I did it in
Okay.
Orangeville.
Okay.
And I sat in that class and it was one of the most amazing experiences I had because it was really the first time I connected with my brother on a
Mm.
spiritual level with a meditation that you did with us. And yeah, ever since then, I've gotten to know you, I've done your
Yeah.
courses, I've worked with you. And so I'm so happy to have you here because you have been such a pivotal source, a pillar in my life that has guided me through my own healing journey. And so I want to share you with the world because it's been amazing what I've gotten out of it. And so I can't wait for you to share all that
That's
you
lovely.
do. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into doing what you're doing because you do many different things which all sort of fall under the umbrella of healing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do. I mean, I do. I have a pretty broad umbrella. I'm a spiritual medium, and that's sort of, the major work that I do is working privately with folks and work with audiences as well, helping them to connect with loved ones that they've lost. So those who have crossed over. I'm a published author. My book is How to Become a Medium. It's a step-by-step guide to connecting with the other side. That was published in 2015. I do a lot of work in energy healing. I'm a soul-based coach, so I'm certified in that work to do that. I also have a TV show, Ghosts of Dufferin County and Beyond.
Which I love.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a spiritual educator. So I have a teaching center, a bricks and mortar location, the School of Mediumship and Spiritual Studies, and you've been there a lot.
Hmm.
And I also have an online school under the same title. So I work with a lot of folks in a lot of different ways. And what really started me on the journey, well, initially was loss. And when I give talks or speeches or I'm talking to groups, I say that, we come from all different walks coming into a spiritual or soul-based life. But a lot of us, you'll find, come to it out of loss or out of some trauma. And so, my story is not really any different from that. I did grow up as a kid, I talk about this in my book. I grew up as a kid initially in a Roman Catholic, like Italian, Canadian, Irish household type thing.
We're so much
Um,
alike.
but I did eventually sort of make my departure from religious practice, at 10, 11 years old. And I had a practice of meditation and exploring earth-based religions, communicating with trees and plants and all of these things and attuning to the natural cycles of the earth. And but in all of that, spiritual development and practice as a young person, I really didn't have any desire to communicate with the departed. I just didn't. And it really wasn't until, my dad transitioned in 2010, that I started asking those big questions about, what happens when we die? Do we still exist? If we do exist, where are we? If we exist, if we're still alive, can we make contact and let our loved ones know that? And if so, can I get some of that information, please? And I've always been a lifelong learner. So, it surprises people sometimes. Lots of folks, subscribe to the idea that you have to be born with the talents of being a medium, but that that's not true. None of my professional experience supports that truth. All of my professional experience, my personal experience, it all says, listen, everybody has the capacity to do it. You have to learn to do it. It's like skill building. It's true that some folks will be, innately better at it initially perhaps than others, but it's not something that, it won't evade you if you want to learn to do it. So that was my experience. It was something that I learned to do. And then over time, I began to do the work professionally. And again, as time went on, I wrote about it and taught about it, and, and I do all that stuff now. So that's sort of it, and at the moment that I really decided to learn, I had a ton of healing to do. I was so anxious. I had so much anxiety. I had so much fear, and I talk about this in my book too. I was dealing with life and death at the same time, like having my first child and then watching death, right? My first significant real death. I mean, I lost my grandparents when I was a teenager, but that was really nothing like losing my dad. And also watching this patriarchal figure, like very strong figure, watching him, witnessing him being scared of death and being very, very fearful and very, very anxious. It just sort of like did a number on me. I definitely, I was rocked to my knees. And so I had a choice to make in a very real way. Either medicate myself, right? Because I couldn't function, but I also had a newborn at the time. And I felt like if I was going to like check out of reality, that probably wouldn't be good for her. And so I had to make a very real decision. Was I going to approach the help that I needed from, and there's no right or wrong answer here, but for me, the most appropriate answer ended up being not taking like a sort of like Western pharmaceutical approach. I took a totally different approach. So I began to do a multitude of things all at once. I began learning to meditate again because I had bucked that practice years earlier. I started working with an acupuncturist. I started working in traditional Chinese medicine. I also started communicating and opening up to greater realities beyond the form world, which were hugely transformative to me and hugely influential in my life. So I did a lot of stuff all at once at the same time as learning to communicate with spirit people.
Wow. That, and I think back to 2010, as you said, which doesn't seem that long ago. And in the grand scheme of things, I guess, I mean, it's a decade ago, but at the same time, all that has happened, and look where you are now in just 10 years and how that's transformed you and how many lives you're shaping and transforming by what you do as well. That is so incredible. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about is sort of the basis of what really got me on this road of transformation and healing was, you talked about soul connection and soul coaching, and that you're certified in soul coaching. So can you explain what that is, the benefits of it, and how different does like one-on-one coaching with you work and look versus class? Because I've done both with you as well, and sort of the benefits of how that can help people.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a big thing to try to define, it's like asking us to define soul, and we can't really do that, but we can come up with concepts or ideas, so we have a reference point for understanding it. It's akin to saying, can you define love? It's really challenging to do that, but we have to come up with concepts around it, reference points, so that we can comprehend it in some way. So, soul-based coaching in its most basic essence is, helping folks to come into, a harmonious and peaceful relationship with their ordinary everyday selves and their ordinary everyday lives. And that includes, the personality or ego aspects of the self. And further to that, it is to, bring in, the development of a very real and a very trusting relationship between the ordinary self, or the finite self, the ego, the personality, and one's truest nature, which is, their essence as soul. And so it's bringing those two aspects of self into, right relationship with one another. And, there's one thing that, after I sort of define it the best we can, I'll also talk about what it isn't, and to begin with that, one thing that it isn't is it's not a sort of transcendental process of like bypassing the ego or the personality or denying aspects of it. So when I say it's about bringing one into, good and right relationship with everyday aspects of self, we find a lot of harmony and a lot of peace when we can, one, understand the self. Two, if there are aspects of the self that are non-beneficial for us, then we can learn to develop those aspects of self, bring them into a closer alignment with the nature of soul within oneself. And when we do that, we feel like we're living on purpose. We feel congruent. We feel like we are presenting and showing up in our life and in our world the way that feels meaningful to us. One of the things that we do a lot in soul-based coaching is working in, transmutational work, which is working within the personality self, which is where we find those wounds. Primary wounds exist within, the personality body or the ego. So it's going to be in the mental body, the emotional body. We can hold it in the physical body. Wounding is hugely influential to us, right? It's consciously and subconsciously. It's, it's at play. And so those are often places that are tough to go to. And that's why soul-based coaching is incredibly difficult work, but it's incredibly rewarding work. And as I mentioned earlier, one thing that it isn't, and you'll find this a lot in the quote unquote spiritual practice, is it's not this transcendental work that says, I'm not what's happened to me. I'm not a body, I'm a soul having a human experience, right?
Mhm.
Actually, we're
Mhm.
both. We're humans having a soulful influenced experience, and we're souls having a human experience. We are all of those things, right? And we
Right.
are not to sort of bypass or transcend beyond the woundedness, because that's really actually why we're here from a soul perspective. We're here, at school, essentially. So part of what we do in soul-based coaching or soul-based counseling is to often what it looks like is changing our relationship to from who we are now to what has happened to us. When we can explore goings on, things that have occurred in our lives, in the light of soul, which usually is going to relate to some kind of meaning or some kind of purpose, when we can ascertain some kind of meaningfulness that we can extract out of a painful experience, it changes how we feel about that experience. And within that, some healing occurs. But what it's really about is empowering oneself. It's not looking at it and saying, why was that necessary for me? Or why did that have to happen? Although we might view it from that place, everybody's individual. What it's really about doing is saying, okay, this has occurred. Okay, now what out of this is available to me to, one, improve the character of myself, strengthen or embolden my personality, bring it closer into alignment with soul, have me essentially, in the most basic sense, become either more powerful, more loving, or more intelligent in my life. So it's like, what can I take out of that that's going to do something for me now? That's really what this is about, that process of
Mhm.
exploring wounding. The trouble with soul-based coaching is that often what I see when I work with clients is that, they've spent years and years, working in, clearing their energy field, laying on someone else's bed, sometimes in being in circumstances where, victimhood is stoked. And that's fine, because that's part of everyone's individual process. But what this is really about is empowering you. It's about, what can I do about this that's going to make me show up in my life in a way that I feel is meaningful? And
Mhm.
so soul-based coaching is building the scaffolding to basically make that happen, while doing no denial of self. It's really about, the first part of it is really mapping the self. It's that know thyself bit, and no denial of self, because
Mhm.
there's this misconception, and you would have heard this too. There's this misconception in, the general spiritual community that, ego is like a bad thing. Got to rid ourselves of the ego. She's coming from ego. He's operating from ego. Ego is, essentially that form part of ourselves, that mental, emotional, physical body. It's how we interface with the world of form. We can't interface through soul, this non-form existence. That is what influences, or has the potential to influence, how we connect with the world of form. But
Mhm.
our personality, our ego selves, this is how we interact. This is how you and me communicate with each other. So
Right.
it's not about ridding ourselves of ego. It's about strengthening it. It's about emboldening it. And it's about having it more influenced by soul, okay, than the physical body, mental body, and emotional body itself, right?
Mhm.
Because you can take a really powerful idea, you can take a really powerful concept and share that, right? You can share that with some other somewhere. You can share it as a form of service, whatever that is. But if it's not influenced by soul, it will be viewed very egotistically. It's very about self. It's self-motivated rather than other motivated or other focused. But we have
Mhm.
to take those same tools, that physical body, the mental capacity, the emotional capacity. If we can deliver that same concept, idea, or service more influenced by soul, that presents as a loving expression of oneself. And so that's how we express souls, through the ego bodies. So it's not about ridding ourselves of ego, but bringing it into alignment with soul and understanding how to do that. And that's what soul-based coaching is.
Mhm. For me, when I sort of tapped into what we talked about in soul-based love, and really truly understanding what that is and where that comes from, an immense amount of healing happened for me.
Yeah.
And mainly because it was about forgiveness.
Mm.
And I was able to look at all the trauma and all the things that had happened. And I was able to realize that, you know, they were operating from a different level of consciousness, and
Mhm.
as was I. And so being able to put that into perspective and look at it that way, I was able to find forgiveness for those who have hurt me. And so
Yeah.
now I go about my day, everything I try to look at from that place of love.
Mhm.
So any kind of confrontation, any kind, like traffic even, I try
Mhm.
to look at from a place of love. Why is this happening? This is happening for my benefit. I don't know what that is, but
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
may
I mean,
never
there's
know.
so many facets to touch on there, right? Like one, the soul love versus, emotional love. Soul love being non-attached, non-specific, right? And then, you know, as consciousness changes, we begin to ask different questions and respond differently to what's going on in our lives. So that's a great example there with the traffic, right? Like, I
Hmm.
trust there's meaning and purpose behind this, even if I don't know what it is, even if it hurts right now. That has us look at experiences differently as they're coming toward us. And it doesn't necessarily make them hurt less,
Hmm.
right? But we approach it from a space that actually is less wounding to us, is what really ends up happening. But, the big thing with, and you'll know this for sure, the big thing, I talked about the beginning of it, of soul-based coaching, which is like know thyself, to understand, abstract learning that was available out of experiences that we had based on the consciousness we had at the time, right?
Right.
The big part that sort of separates this type of coaching or counseling from maybe other types of soul-based or spiritual-based counseling is the integration, because that's what it's really about. Like, you can learn all you need to learn about all about lessons or opportunities that were available in circumstances and situations in your own life. You can learn them and you can process it and you can do a lot of healing there. But if you don't integrate the available learning there into your life in a meaningful way, that means consciously choosing, even in difficulty, to respond and show up from that place of new consciousness, that new light that's been illuminated within you, that new place of understanding. If you integrate it, nothing really changes. You know something, so your awareness has grown. You know something about yourself now that you didn't know before, right?
Hmm.
Or you know something about life that you didn't know before, right?
Hmm.
But you, the essence of you, really hasn't changed. That's what consciousness changes, right? It's like changing the essence of who we are. It's not just knowing what we should know about ourselves. It's about becoming. And that's the integration. And that's the major difficulty in soul-based coaching, because diving into the awareness is hard too, because it's poking at wounds. But the integration is the part that takes resilience. It takes a whole lot of willpower. It takes a whole lot of commitment to transforming oneself into expanding your own consciousness and how you view things and how you understand things. So, and you
Hmm.
get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's some resistance, especially when you've been carrying something for
Yeah.
so long.
Yeah.
It's what's familiar, and we tend to go back to what's
We do.
familiar because
Yeah.
it seems scary going into something new. So
Mhm.
resilience is a great word to
Yeah.
describe
Yeah.
it,
And that's
because
why often in soul-based coaching or soul-based counseling, it's a process. So you don't take, like, one-on-one session or even one class. You stay connected, so that you can be supported along the way, because that resistance piece and that return to default, that safe place, right? That's not a unique experience for you. That's true for mostly everybody. So when we can sort of like set up those supports for ourselves in our life, we're more successful at the integration. That's what I know.
hmm and I tell my students all the time, the more you do something consciously aware that you're doing it, it
Yeah,
eventually becomes muscle memory.
that's right. That's that new brain pathway that you're creating. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was just consciously going, okay, wait, I'm, I'm being the victim. How can I turn this around?
That's
And so
right.
instead of saying, why is this happening to me? I started going, what am I meant to learn from this?
Yes,
And
exactly.
so that's, and you're right, implementation is key. And that's what even people who take courses in business or whatever the case may be, they have all the knowledge up here. They've done the
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
but then you've got to implement it into whatever it is you're
That's right. The
doing.
integration is where the change really happens. That's where the change in consciousness happens. And the bit about, sometimes we do have experiences where we are, from some objective perspective, in a victim space. Someone has done something to us. So it's not to diminish, like, the validity of feeling victimized, because that's a very real feeling, and we are not to rid ourselves of that when it presents.
Mhm.
But it is our responsibility and nobody else's to grow out of that, right? So we can identify from a victim space, and there's a meaningful, there's something in there for us, and we're not to deny it, right? This is what soul-based coaching is. It's not denying any aspect of the self, but I'm also not like building my house here, right? Like I'm going to
Yes.
identify what's going on here, and then it's on me to do something with this that's going to make me either more powerful, more loving, or intelligent in some way. And that is going to make my life feel more meaningful. I'm going to be in better relationship between my personality or woundable self and my infinitely incredible, unwoundable soul.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I found was the biggest transformation for me. I stopped looking at everybody as a potential to harm, and I started looking at everything from love. And still, there were people who have harmed me since,
Yeah.
but I view it differently because, I see them as a wounded soul, or going
Yeah.
through their own thing.
Yeah.
And I just understand that, our
Yeah. And that
connection at
brings
that
up
time.
another, yeah. And that brings up another good point. Cause I mean, we're capturing, maybe a 30-minute snapshot of soul coaching, which is impossible to
Yes.
characterize the whole thing. But just in case for our viewers, it's important to know too that, developing in consciousness, working in soul coaching, this is never about becoming unwoundable, right?
Hmm.
Because the purpose of being here in form is to have experiences. By and large, human consciousness expands, learns, develops out of suffering. It's like the
Hmm.
shit reality that's somehow part of our existence here. And
Hmm.
so, these crappy things that happen to us, these things that trigger us, that hurt us, those are usually the big vehicles for us in developing our own consciousness, becoming more soul influenced, more connected to not only this sort of temporal reality, but greater reality as well. So when you develop consciousness, it's not like saying, you can't hurt me anymore. Of course, we're still woundable. If we're here in form, right, then we're
Hmm.
still woundable, and we're not to try to prevent that, because that's the same idea as saying I'm going to close up all the walls around my heart and nobody can touch me, right? So it's not about becoming unwoundable. And I love that you said that, even since doing a lot of this work yourself, you've been in experiences where you've been hurt or wounded by somebody, right?
Hmm.
And what you do with it is not say, I shouldn't be wounded. You say, okay, what is this teaching me about myself? What
Hmm.
can I do about this to make myself either more this, or this? And then become that. Start making these conscious decisions of connecting in with those soul energies that were blocked before and begin expressing them.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And I found too that it has changed my relationships with people who were already in my life, but it has
Yeah.
also brought some really incredible, amazing people into my life, right? Like different support groups and stuff like that, where we've all been on similar journeys, and we've all kind of joked, we're part of a club nobody ever wanted to join, but here we are.
Yeah.
And so there's such a force when humans connect from a place of wounding or trauma, and understanding that what that's like. Then all of a sudden it's empathy, it's understanding what somebody else is going through, and that you're not the only one. And I
Yeah.
think
There's huge
there's,
power in community that
yeah,
way. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I've seen people doing amazing things
Mhm.
who, just a short while ago could barely lift their head off a pillow. And,
Yeah.
so it
And that brings us to sort of that one part of your question that I don't think I answered was, working privately or working in a group,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
I found that there's tremendous healing power and connection power when you work in a group, when you do soul-based coaching in a group or soul-based counseling in a group. Because I always find that, the groups align, like the people that are supposed to be in that particular group, they're all there, and you get to hear experiences from other people. And what I find, like without exception, is that, by week 2 or week 3, you're listening to other people and you're thinking, holy crap, that's me, right? There are these similarities that bring us together. There are parts of these human experiences, these aspects of consciousness that we don't all have at play at the same time, but groups of us do. And when we are able to connect with people, 2 things happen. One, it helps us to be more understanding and compassionate towards the other, but then it also demonstrates to us, hey, hello, can I also express that toward myself? And
yes, yes.
yeah, exactly. Like if I can offer it here, I need to offer it here too. And that common experience is really, really powerful. And then, the thing about maybe a drawback of working in a group would be that when we work in a group, or whether we work privately, we are exposing the woundedness, right? And either you're doing it in front of people or you're just doing it with me. And so it's up to sort of personal preference. Do you feel like you can fully expose yourself to yourself and to a witness? Can you do that when the witnesses are multiple, right? Especially when we deal with things like shame. It's a really hard aspect of consciousness. The experiences are usually really tough. So it's a very individual thing. And then of course there's the other ordinary reality at play, that when you do this work in a group, in terms of the investment in it, it's less, because you share your time with other people. And what's happening is your experiences may or may not be able to be tended to in a very tailored way, but I have programmed them that, when folks apply to come do the program, and I say apply because, we're only ready to do this work when we're ready to do it, not a moment before.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I always like to ask folks, what is it that you feel like you want to come to work with? So I always make sure that what we're all bringing to the table, that I can address everyone in a sort of programmed way, where we have, moments of Taylor, but, that the general model of what I choose for that course, for that particular group, is going to work for everybody that's there. And then, a lot of people do is they do this work in groups, and then they have follow-up individual support sessions where necessary, which is, it's really about this act of love toward yourself, because up until that point, usually what happens is nothing else has worked. Nothing else has precipitated change, not in a substantial way. So like, here you are now. And so it's another act of love toward yourself. And sometimes it's a doozy to go through, but it's incredibly, the sense of this, like, philosophy of working in the concept of wholeness, and what that feels like, arriving at that space, living from that space, it's incredibly valuable, and it really enriches people's lives. You got to stick with it though. That's sort of how it goes.
Absolutely. And even when there's setbacks, and I've actually counseled some other people in support groups on this, because I've recognized that even when there's a setback, you're still moving forward. A setback is just that. It's one blip in time where, you might break down and cry. You might, have a day where just you can't do anything.
Yeah.
But, don't lose hope that it's all gone and it's all for naught.
Yeah.
Taking steps forward, because even
That's
if
right.
it's
And there's a
tiny
couple things.
step.
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play there. One is impermanent. This day is crap, right? Okay, this day isn't going to be tomorrow. I do have power to shift some things, even if it's one thought, right? Like, I have a power to change this if I want to change it. And then the other thing at play is, and I usually say to students, as they're sort of moving out of programming, listen, you're going to have setbacks, and you'll also have moments that show up where you're like, man, I thought I was done with this crap. And I always say, this isn't the universe testing you. This isn't you failing. This is an opportunity for you to live from that new space. Because if you didn't have a new opportunity, you won't solidify that aspect of who you are. So when it comes, say, here it is. It's not a test. This is my opportunity.
I also find more times than not, when something happens, I'll be, oh, maybe I didn't learn that lesson, back then. And it's perhaps repeating on purpose. Like, I kind of think, okay, good one, universe.
Yeah.
Okay,
there's two levels of that, because we may not have done learning from the initial situations or circumstances, and so they repeat. Or we have done the learning, but we haven't done the integration. So it's showing up again, right? Or what's happening is you're simply circling back. I mean, this is what a life and many lives is. The journey of the soul is that we continue to circle back to the same concepts, the same learning, but we're able to extract learning at a deeper level now than we were before. So it's a similar situation, but the aspect that we're learning and integrating here is much more profound or substantial than it was last time I circled it. It was from a different viewpoint, from a different vantage point. Now I'm ready to revisit that again from a totally different space. So that is really what means we shouldn't be surprised when situations and circumstances repeat. If it's the exact same level of learning, then we have a lack of learning or integration that's happening. But if it's a deeper level, a different vantage point, that's your indication that says, I'm ready to visit this at a new level now, new players, new situation, same concept, but a deeper, more profound level.
I've also found too that a lot of that, circling back, it's because I either wasn't compassionate with myself, or I wasn't fully open to loving myself, or I
Sure.
wasn't gentle or nurturing to myself. So
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, it was how I was treating myself
that's
that
right.
was ultimately what was holding me back.
That's right. Now you could have that same circumstance boil around again. You say, "What? I'm equally as compassionate." And then you'll say, "What is it then?" Then we ask that question, and what you'll find is, next time it might be about, can I extend that same compassion or kindness toward the other player there? Like, do you see what I'm
Mm.
saying? There's a
Hmm.
different vantage point. So it's not that you're repeating; it's that you're ready to ask, visit a different aspect of this.
Yes. Oh, so good. Okay. So I also have a huge question, and this is partially for me, and hopefully it will benefit other people. Is there a correlation? And I'm going to say I already know the answer because you've said it. But between trauma survivors or survivors of loss and opening up those channels to spiritual connectedness and to mediumship, like you said. Um, and how can someone safely cultivate that if they're recognizing that that's happening?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess the first thing that I'll say is that, someone could ask me, is there a correlation between this and developing spiritually, or this and developing spiritually? And kind of like my blanket answer for anything is basically yes, but that's only because, all of us are, innately gifted with the ability to connect to the cosmos, to connect with spirit, to connect with the universe. I don't, I like, special is not a thing for me. I'm not special in this. Nobody is. I really don't believe that. I believe that we make choices in our life, and we co-create, and we pre-design. We do both of these things. But what I will say about those who have experienced loss or trauma, and we have done some work in terms of healing or growing out of that, what I've found is that in doing so, we come to know ourselves pretty well and pretty clearly. And that's when we've done some work in it. And when we do that work and we experience some healing in some regard, our frequency changes. The essence of who we are changes. And as we, in your case too, Diva, as you've done a lot of healing work, the very essence of who you are has changed. Your vibrational frequency has changed. The qualities that are you have changed. And as we move closer and closer into being this most loving self, and that doesn't mean emotional love, we become closer in nature to the nature of spirit. And as to be a conduit for a spirit person, you have to be a close vibrational match to them, right? If you are, in the throes of grief, having a really difficult time, and you try to be a channel for a non-form being, okay, that no longer holds these lower vibrational parts of consciousness, if you will not be a match to them when we're in deep dark places. So it's sort of like oil and water. We can't merge with them, and that is what happens. We're not like a tube and they whistle through us and we say what they're saying. We actually merge our energy with them. So if we aren't a vibrational match, guess what? They try to merge, they can't merge. It's sort of like staying at a distance from us. So when we experience healing out of something, any level of healing, out of something like trauma, out of grief, out of loss, whatever that is, as it changes our frequency, and as the frequency goes higher and higher, we're more receptive and open to the universe. I've also found that as trauma survivors, as loss survivors, we have been either through like the dark night of the soul, we've been rocked on our knees, and
Mm-hmm.
we have asked big questions, and we've asked in some way, consciously or subconsciously, to basically become validated in still being here in some way. And when we go to
Absolutely.
those
Yeah.
places, we are receptive and willing to perceive information, answers that don't come from a human being's mouth. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So we are already sensitized to the notion that there is consciousness, that there is power beyond the physical body, and we're receptive to that because we have either needed that comfort or validation or support or whatever that is. We've gone to those places, outside our immediate physical interior. And so, everybody's individual, but I think when we have no better place to go, out of a circumstance or circumstances in our lives, we are more willing to maybe more receptive to help in any possible way. And that often at some point may include something that is non-form related, whether it's a family member visiting you from the other side, whether it's, a warm breeze or a bright light going off or an inspiring dream, something that keeps us connected. So I think that that's it. And I also think that if you are a trauma survivor or a loss survivor, and you have gone through shame, you have gone through being either rejected or unsupported by either circumstances around you, people around you, your community. So, this sort of non-form reality, it seems a little woo-woo to a lot of people, but maybe you're already familiar with feeling like you're not a part of ordinary community, or maybe you don't, but that might be something that that's not such unfamiliar territory for you. So you're not afraid of venturing there. And I think that comes into play too. I think a lot of things come into play.
I feel like I've open to the universe.
Yeah.
Before, I felt almost like this lump of coal, so tightly wound and closed off. And that part of that was me protecting myself.
Yeah.
And now that I've opened up and that I've realized, the healing that needs to happen, the hurdles I need to overcome.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, it's like I've opened to energy, so I feel energy more from other people in situations I'm in, and I'm starting to hear voices, and I mean that sounds bad if people are listening, like if you're hearing voices, but no, I know who they are. I know who the voices are coming from. And actually, I have to tell you a story. I did a show at the Fergus Grand Theater, and I mean, it's well known that, many people have experienced ghosts in that.
Oh yeah.
That's
Okay.
the case. Yeah. Oh yeah. You need to check it out.
Okay.
And so one time after the show, there was a few of us that stayed afterwards. There were orbs everywhere. There was things moving backstage while we were sitting in front. And it was very exciting. And we thought, oh, okay, we got to experience this. And then that night I went home, and normally I hear my brother yell in my ear when I'm nodding off to sleep, because that's my brother's jokester personality.
Yeah, I've had that too. Yeah.
He would shout at me and it would startle me awake. But this time I heard him, and then I heard about 12 other voices from around the room. Hi, Diva. Oh, Diva. And I sort of stopped, and I thought, that's new. And then I realized I didn't quite ground myself when I left the theater that night. So I invited all these guests into my home, and I had to do a clearing in my house, because all of a sudden there were voices all over the place saying hello to me.
Yeah, which is actually, that's indicating to you that you're clairaudient, because a lot of new students to mediumship, what they experience often when they're going to bed for a brief period, but it happens to almost everybody, is, they'll see a range of faces sort of looking at them, but they don't recognize them, right? And they're not to be paid attention to. I mean, we're not going to talk about that today, but that is an experience that a lot of folks happen. It sounds like you've had the same, but you hear them rather than see. So that's really interesting. And then the other thing about, you feel, once you're able to connect beyond yourself, expand your connections to the universe and to people, which also is an indication that you've connected more with purpose. Okay. Because when we feel hopeless, if we feel alone, if we feel small and dark, we haven't disconnected from our soul's purpose, because that's always available, but we have disconnected from our either knowingness of what that is, or our belief that it still exists, okay, even though it's still there. So once in this process of transmutation, and then process of transformation after that, which is soul growing, actively growing soul, or growing consciousness, when we connect back with purpose, even if we don't know what that is, but we feel like we're living with intentionality, if we feel like even an action is purposeful, when we connect back into purpose, our whole world expands. And when the universe expands that way, it's not just physically, so that's what you experience, not just a physical expansion of who's coming in and who's coming out, but how you experience the world around you, both in form and non-form. And that's very ordinary. Like for me, that's very ordinary. For folks that haven't experienced that before, you know, moving through a transmutational process often will open those doors and change your experiences, much like it has for you.
I've actually really enjoyed it because it's also helped on my process, especially grieving my brother and knowing that he's here and knowing when he's around. But it's also made me conscious of my own energy and the energy that I put out. And so now I make a conscious effort anytime I leave the house that I'm trying to expand this good vibrational energy because I want to be a force of healing for anybody I come in contact with.
This is it. This is like living with intentionality. You've just expressed to us one of your ways of living intentionally and acting from that place, like integrating it. So this is like, it's a great demonstration of the power of this work. Just what you've said right there.
It's been hugely transformative for me because when I think of where I was even just, 6, 8, 12 months ago versus where I am now is huge. And to try and explain to people that it was only 8 months ago that I was dealing with suicidal ideation and I was having to talk to a hotline, to then be able to step off from that and go, okay, I've taken all these steps, I've done all these things, and this is now me wanting to provide those same resources so that other people can find what works for them on their journey and give hope that there is the opportunity to heal and to move forward and to make an impact on the world.
Yeah. I mean, and what you're also highlighting there is, funny enough, because we just spoke about it, you could think about what you're doing right now, right? Think about, how you want to show up for other people. And after you were able to show up for yourself that way, right? And you might be able to look at that and say, well, there's something that I created out of some of that darkness that I had, which maybe sometimes changes some aspect of how we feel about what's gone on, maybe relate to some purpose there, maybe some meaning gets a little clearer as time goes on. Maybe we never identify it, but it's on us to know that we can make whatever we can out of a circumstance, and so within that there's some purpose, whatever that will eventually look like.
I call it taking my mess and making a message.
Absolutely, love that.
Right? Because I don't want to deny that those things ever happened.
No.
And I'm actually grateful that they happened. I've come to a place of gratefulness in looking back at all those things and all those people. And I'm grateful because without it, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to highlight for, some of the viewers that if you're not in that space of gratefulness, that's okay. You don't have to arrive there. You might, but you also don't have to. So that doesn't mean you've completed a journey because you've arrived at gratitude. Like it doesn't have to look like that, guy. Like it doesn't, but it might. And so everyone's very individual. So we can have no expectations on ourselves in this, each of us has come here for a different reason.
Yes. And I find gratitude is like meditation. It's a practice. It's ongoing. Like you never know it all. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Because some days I have great meditation experiences and other days I can't get the squirrels out of my head. Right.
I love that. We got to be real here, right? Let's be real. Otherwise we're being transcendental about woundedness and trauma, right? Which doesn't get us anywhere.
There's no black and white in this area, right? It's just, it's constantly working at it and moving forward. So that's my plan.
And that's, it's not to minimize. I mean, we want to have transcendental experiences in a life so that we can have experiences with the universe and non-form reality, right? But we don't want to transcend past the wound and then not deal with the wound, right? That's not what this is about. But we do need to have experiences that are transcendental, but not the kind that leave us, leaving behind or shoving under the rug the things that hurt us.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those things are scary. And sometimes things pop up too. And that's what I'm finding now, that things are popping up from even my childhood that I didn't know that there were these imprints that had happened. And so again, it's a constant process of, oh, there's something new. Now, how do I address this? right?
Yeah,
And to
that's right.
embrace it rather than go, nope, 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 I can't deal with
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And
And
it,
it's also okay, you know, sometimes if we say, I see this is coming up, but at this exact moment in my life, I don't have the bandwidth for dealing with that. But I'm going
mhm,
to earmark that and I'll revisit, and that's okay too. So
mhm.
don't feel like it's showing up. I got to process this right now, because sometimes we can become overwhelmed. And
Yes.
expanding consciousness, dealing with woundedness, it happens bit at a time. So understand that as a map. It's a bit at a time process, and it's not this moment of enlightenment or this one thing I did. Like, it doesn't happen like that. This is a life,
Hmm.
and these experiences unfold out of a series of decisions and occurrences, and that's how it ought to be. Yeah,
Hmm. And everything comes into your space when it's time,
that's right.
right? I met you when I was ready to take what you were offering and be able to work with that in my
Yeah,
life. Because
yeah,
I think you're right. If I had met you any sooner than that, I wouldn't have known how to move
yeah,
forward
yeah,
with all I've learned from you.
yeah,
It all happens in its time and in its space, and everybody's time and space is different.
yeah.
So, oh, this has been so amazing. I could talk to you forever because you're like a wealth of knowledge, and I'm
Mm,
the sponge, and I'm just like, oh, keep talking, Marianne, because you're brilliant. And thank you so much
thank
for
you.
offering this, this guided knowledge to everybody else, and thank you for what you've done for me. Now, that being said, where can people find you?
Yeah, they can find me at maryannkennedy.ca, MARYANNEKENNEDY.ca, on Facebook at Spiritual Medium Marianne Kennedy. And so I want to just extend that real thankfulness to you, because it's such an honor to see you stepping into purpose, stepping into light out of shadow. Yeah,
Hmm.
so that's really amazing to see. And it's so important. So thank you for sharing your journey with everybody else.
Oh, it's my pleasure, right? If I can help one person, then that's my goal. And we're all in this together, right?
We are.
Nobody nobody gets out alive. So we're all on this path, and
That's right.
we're meant to help each other.
Agreed.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Most
We
welcome.
need to have you back and talk
Yep,
more.
anytime.
Great.
Bye, guys.